The sheriff's irons clicked around Garrick Hale's wrists just as his little girl grabbed Eleanor's hand and cried, "Mama, why are they taking Papa?" What had a lame horse, a lonely black widow, and one unwanted goodbye set in motion? Traveler's saddle creaked in the cold dawn as Garrick pulled the final strap tight. Eleanor stood in the barn doorway, hearing the horse breathe and leather groan. "He's healed," she said. Garrick wouldn't meet her eyes. "Yeah." Then she saw the packed bedroll. Why was he leaving the one place that had begun to feel like home? "Tell me, would you let him ride away?" By the third week of August, the Wyoming country had forgotten the smell of rain. Grass along the trail had gone the color of old rope. Dust rose beneath Traveler's hooves and followed Garrick Hale westward in a long brown cloud, as though the road itself meant to keep account of everywhere he had been. The bay gelding stumbled. Garrick tightened his arm around Lydia before she could slide from the saddle. "Easy, boy." Traveler caught himself, but his right foreleg trembled. Garrick stopped. That was becoming the problem. Every time they stopped, he saw something he could ignore while moving. The swelling above Traveler's fetlock, the white salt dried along the horse's neck, the way Lydia no longer complained about being thirsty. She lay against Garrick's chest beneath his old coat, though the afternoon was hot enough to make sweat gather under his hatband. He touched her forehead, still burning. "Papa, I'm here. Are we almost there?" Garrick looked ahead. There had been no there for nearly 200 miles, only west, only the next place willing to pay a man for his hands. Inside one saddlebag was a Nebraska bank notice folded so many times the creases had begun tearing through the words. Beside it lay 3 coins, Rose's faded handkerchief, and nothing worth selling that he had not already sold. He had kept the horse. He had kept the handkerchief. Most important, he had kept Lydia beside him. Until that afternoon, he had told himself that was enough. Traveler stumbled again. This time the gelding went to one knee. "Traveler!" Garrick swung down with Lydia in his arms. The horse struggled upright, blowing hard through his nostrils. Garrick stared at the swollen leg. Another 10 miles might ruin him. 5 might. Then Garrick noticed the fence. Weathered cedar posts crossed the open country toward a stand of cottonwoods. Nailed crookedly to the gate was a sun-bleached board. Cross Ranch. Beyond it stood a low ranch house, barn, windmill, corrals, and the dark shape of cattle gathered near a water trough. Garrick looked at the house, then at Traveler. He had spent months learning how little pride was worth at an auction. Still, it took him several seconds to open that gate. A woman stepped onto the porch before he reached the hitching rail. She was black, perhaps somewhere in her 30s, dressed in a plain work skirt and white blouse with the sleeves turned back from her wrists. A Winchester rested within reach beside the door. Her eyes went first to Garrick, then to the girl in his arms. Everything in her face changed except her composure. "How long has she been burning like that?" "Since yesterday morning." "You have water?" "Not enough." "Bring her inside. I can work for it." The woman was already opening the door. "Put the girl down before you fall down with her." Her name was Eleanor Cross. Garrick learned that after Lydia was lying beneath a clean sheet in a small back bedroom with a cool cloth across her forehead. Eleanor moved without fuss. Water first, then broth, then milk thinned with water because Lydia's stomach had been empty too long. Garrick stood beside the bed with his hat crushed between both hands, looking more uncomfortable with kindness than he had looked with hunger. Eleanor opened a dresser drawer for another cloth. For an instant, Garrick saw a little wooden comb inside. One tooth was missing. Eleanor's hand stopped. She closed the drawer. Neither of them said anything. Outside, an older ranch hand had arrived from the south pasture. Pete Yarrow was lean, gray-whiskered, and slow in the deliberate way of men who had spent their lives around livestock. He crouched beside Traveler and ran both hands carefully down the gelding's leg. "How bad?" Garrick asked. Pete pressed above the fetlock. Traveler flinched. "Strain. Don't feel a break." Garrick let out the breath he had been holding. Then Pete stood. "But you ride him now, you might walk the rest of the way." "How long?" 3 weeks. Garrick stared at him. Pete glanced at the swelling again. "Maybe 4. 4 weeks. Garrick looked beyond the corral toward the empty western horizon. Eleanor was standing several yards away. She saw his face. "I don't take charity," Garrick said. "I didn't offer any." He looked at her. "My north fence needs rails replaced. Drainage ditch on the east pasture needs clearing. Barn roof has 2 bad patches. Pete has been telling me for a month I need another hand." 2 months, Pete corrected. Eleanor ignored him. "Wages, meals, and a bunk in the small room off the kitchen. Your girl stays in the house until she's well. Your horse stays until Pete says he can travel." Garrick considered it. "Take Lydia's meals out of my wages." "No. She eats here, she costs you." Eleanor's gaze held his. "I pay a man's work. I don't buy his gratitude." Something in Garrick's expression shifted. Not surrender, perhaps respect. He nodded once. "All right." At sunrise the next morning, Eleanor found him replacing the broken rail beside the north corral. "You were supposed to start after breakfast." Garrick drove a nail home. "I ate your food. That coffee hardly qualifies." "Had 2 biscuits." From behind her, Pete gave a dry chuckle. Eleanor almost smiled. By evening, Lydia's fever had begun to ease. That night, Garrick went to check on her and stopped in the doorway. Eleanor had fallen asleep in a chair beside the bed. One hand rested near Lydia's small fingers. Garrick took a blanket from the foot of the bed and laid it gently over Eleanor's shoulders. Her eyes opened. For a moment, they simply looked at one another. "Thank you," she whispered. Garrick nodded and stepped away. Later, he sat alone in the barn beside Traveler. The gelding chewed hay while moonlight came through the boards in narrow silver lines. Garrick rubbed the horse's neck. "Heel up," he murmured. "Then we're gone." A sound floated from the house. Lydia laughing, her first laugh in days. Garrick's hand stopped against Traveler's mane. Through the barn doorway, he could see one yellow window burning against the black Wyoming night. Much later, from his little room off the kitchen, he heard Lydia's sleepy voice through the wall. "Miss Eleanor?" "Yes?" "Will you still be here tomorrow?" There was a pause. Then Eleanor answered, "I'll be here." Garrick lay awake in the darkness. Rose had died. The bank had taken the farm. Men who promised patience had arrived with papers instead. Every road since Nebraska had taught him the same lesson. Nothing stayed. Yet in the next room, a woman who owed them nothing had just given his daughter something Garrick had not known how to promise for months. Tomorrow. The tomorrows began adding up. Lydia's fever broke 2 days later. By the end of the week, she was sitting at Eleanor's kitchen table, wrapped in a shawl and peeling apples so slowly that Eleanor finished 3 for every one Lydia managed. Garrick saw little of that during daylight. He worked. The north fence came first. Pete Yarrow watched him replace cedar rails under a white Wyoming sun, saying almost nothing. Garrick's palms split open where old calluses had softened during the long ride from Nebraska. The next morning, Pete tossed something beside Garrick's boots, a pair of leather gloves. Garrick looked at him. Pete kept walking. Got tired of seeing blood on good fence posts. That was all. By the second week, Garrick had moved to the drainage ditch along the east pasture. The channel had filled with mud, weeds, and broken branches. Eleanor came down one afternoon carrying coffee in 2 tin cups. Thomas meant to clear that. Garrick stopped digging. Your husband? She nodded. Why didn't he? He died. The wind moved through the dry grass. Garrick set the shovel against his shoulder. Lydia's mother would have liked this place. Eleanor looked at him. What happened? Fever. Neither offered the other those empty words people used when they had nothing useful to give. Garrick went back to digging. Eleanor stayed. At sundown, water finally ran through the opened channel in a thin, shining ribbon. They sat on overturned buckets drinking coffee while the last light settled red across the pasture. That silence between them stopped feeling like something that needed fixing. Every evening, Garrick walked Traveler around the corral. Soon, Eleanor began joining him. The gelding trusted her quickly. He would lower his head whenever she rubbed the white mark between his eyes. One evening, she watched him take several clean steps. He's putting weight on it. Garrick crouched and examined the leg. The swelling had nearly disappeared. Eleanor rested her palm against Traveler's neck. Another week or two, and he'll carry you. Garrick should have been pleased. Instead, he kept looking at the horse. Once my horse heals, I'm leaving. Eleanor's hand became still. She had known that from the beginning. Knowing it had not prepared her for hearing it. Traveler nudged her shoulder. Eleanor rubbed his nose and gave Garrick the smallest smile. Maybe I don't want him to get better. Garrick looked up. For one long second, neither moved. Eleanor seemed to hear her own words only after they were already between them. She turned toward Traveler. Don't look so pleased with yourself. I was talking to the horse. The corner of Garrick's mouth lifted. Course you were. She walked toward the house before he could see her smile. Inside, Lydia had begun filling places neither adult had realized were empty. Eleanor taught her letters beside the stove after supper. Lydia helped preserve apples and followed her through the garden carrying a basket almost as large as she was. There was a mail-order catalog on the kitchen shelf. Lydia always opened it to the same page, a Sunday dress with a green sash. She never asked for it. Eleanor never mentioned noticing. Then one afternoon, Garrick came through the kitchen carrying a box of horseshoe nails. Lydia was standing on a chair beside Eleanor, putting jars onto a shelf. Mama, where do these go? Everything stopped. Lydia froze first. Eleanor's hand remained around a jar, till Garrick stood in the doorway. Nobody corrected the word. After a moment, Eleanor pointed upward. Top shelf. Garrick set down the nails and went outside. Eleanor found him behind the woodshed 20 minutes later, splitting cottonwood with enough force to bury the axe head nearly to the handle. I didn't tell her to call me that. I know. Another piece of wood split. Eleanor waited. Garrick finally rested both hands on the axe. Rose loved her. I know that too. She loved her enough to want her loved after she was gone. Eleanor looked down. Garrick did not see her wipe one finger beneath her eye. Trouble arrived 2 days later in a neat bonnet. Mabel Hicks came from Cutter's Creek carrying a sack of flour and questions disguised as neighborly conversation. She noticed Garrick's hat beside Eleanor's door. She noticed Lydia's slate. She noticed everything. By the time she left, Eleanor's jaw had gone tight. Garrick learned why that evening. If I'm causing trouble, Lydia and I can go. Eleanor turned from the stove. On what horse? He said nothing. And don't decide what I can endure on my behalf. Eleanor, it's my house, my ranch, my name people are using. I'll decide what bothers me. Garrick lowered his eyes. Yes, ma'am. That almost made her angrier. Almost. The following afternoon, another rider came through the gate. Carl Denora, the county assessor, wore a clean brown coat despite the dust. He had been trying to buy Eleanor's east pasture since Thomas Cross was alive. Eleanor refused him again. Denora's eyes moved past her. New fence, cleared drainage, repaired trough. Garrick working near the barn. Cross Ranch was stronger than it had been in years. Your new hand staying long? Dunora asked. That's ranch business. Dunora smiled politely. Later, he found Pete at the corral. What did you say his name was? Pete stared at him. I didn't. Dunora looked toward Garrick. Hale, isn't it? Garrick heard him. So did Eleanor. That evening, Dunora rode toward Cutter's Creek beneath a copper-colored sky. In the barnyard, Pete loosened Traveler's lead rope. The bay gelding trotted across the corral. One clean step, then another, then 6 more. No limp. Pete leaned against the fence. Won't be long now. Garrick stood on one side of the yard. Eleanor stood on the other. Weeks earlier, those words would have sounded like freedom. This time, neither of them looked pleased. Autumn rain finally reached Cross Ranch in the middle of September. It came softly at first, darkening the porch boards and laying the dust flat. Then it fell through the night. At dawn, Garrick walked to the east pasture expecting trouble. There was none. The drainage ditch carried water cleanly toward the lower ground. No flooding, no standing water around the fence posts. Eleanor joined him beneath an oilskin coat. Thomas would have liked seeing that. Garrick looked across the wet pasture. You think so? I know so. That was enough. Cross Ranch had begun changing in small ways. Winter wood stood stacked beneath the shed roof. The north fence was straight. The trough no longer leaked. Pete had stopped calling Garrick Nebraska and had started simply saying Garrick. Even the house sounded different. Lydia reading aloud, Eleanor correcting a word, a spoon striking a coffee cup. Ordinary sounds. Garrick had forgotten how dangerous ordinary things could become once a man wanted to keep them. One evening, he and Eleanor were putting hay into Traveler's stall when he noticed a piece caught in her hair. He lifted his hand, stopped. May I? Eleanor looked at him, then nodded. Garrick removed the straw carefully. His fingers brushed one dark curl near her temple. Neither stepped away. From this house came Lydia's voice. Miss Eleanor? Eleanor turned. The moment closed as quietly as it had opened. 2 mornings later, Pete brought Traveler into the corral. Try him. Garrick saddled the bay lightly and mounted. Traveler walked, then trotted. No stumble, no favoring the right leg. Garrick made one slow circle and dismounted. Pete pressed the old injury. Few more days. Garrick's hand remained on the saddle horn. A few more days. That afternoon, Carl Dunore returned. He carried papers in a leather case and another offer for Eleanor's east pasture. She read the figure once. No. You might consider winter expenses before deciding. I considered them. Running this place alone isn't getting easier. Eleanor looked past him toward Garrick repairing the cattle trough. I'm managing. Dunore followed her gaze. His smile faded by a fraction. He put the papers away. Offers don't stay open forever, Mrs. Cross. Neither does my gate. Dunore left. 3 mornings later, someone struck that gate with metal. Traveler raised his head in the barn. Garrick stepped into the yard, wiping his hands on a rag. 2 mounted men waited outside. The first wore a sheriff's badge. Pete stopped beside the woodpile. Eleanor came onto the porch. The sheriff dismounted. Garrick Hale? Garrick knew that tone. That's me. I'm Dale Coombs, sheriff out of Cutter's Creek. Coombs removed a folded document from his coat. I have a warrant for your arrest. Nobody moved. For what? Armed robbery of a stage outside Laramie. Eleanor came down the steps. You have the wrong man. Coombs looked at the paper. September 14th. Witness information places Hale among the men involved. Garrick stared at him. September 14th. Then he looked toward the north fence. I was here. Coombs waited. North boundary. Sunrise until near dark. Pete was with me. Pete stepped forward. He was. Caleb Yarrow, too, Garrick said. He brought replacement staples afternoon. Pete nodded. Boy stayed till supper. Combs's expression tightened. I believe you believe that. But I've got a sworn warrant. Then check it, Eleanor said. I will. Before you take him. I can't do that. The deputy moved toward Garrick. Eleanor stepped between them. It happened without thought. Garrick looked at her. Eleanor. She did not move. Eleanor. His voice was quieter the second time. Their eyes met. Then Garrick gave one small shake of his head. Trust me. Eleanor stepped aside. Garrick held out his hands. Before the deputy could fasten the irons, the kitchen door flew open. Papa! Lydia ran across the yard. Garrick immediately knelt. She stopped when she saw the sheriff. What happened? Nothing you need to be afraid of. Why's he taking you? There's been a mistake. Her lower lip trembled. Garrick reached for her. I need you to stay here with Miss Eleanor. Lydia dug into her apron pocket. She pulled out a crooked paper star she had cut from an old mercantile advertisement. For luck. Garrick took it as carefully as if it were silver. He folded it once and tucked it inside his shirt. You coming home tonight? His answer caught somewhere behind his teeth. He could not promise tonight, so he promised the only thing he could. I'm coming home. The deputy fastened the cuffs. Lydia stared at the iron around her father's wrists. Then she reached backward until she found Eleanor's hand. Combs mounted. Garrick was helped onto the deputy's spare horse. As they started down the road, Lydia's voice followed them. Mama, why are they taking Papa? Garrick closed his eyes. Mama. Papa. For months he had carried Lydia across country, believing there were only two of them left. Now, at the exact moment somebody was pulling him away, his daughter had named something he had been too frightened to name himself. A family. Eleanor stood at the gate until the riders disappeared. Then she turned. Pete. Yes, ma'am. What were you doing September 14th? North Fence. Caleb? With us most the afternoon. Eleanor walked into the house. She opened the ranch ledger. Feed purchases, fence staples, a receipt from Cutter's Creek. Dates. She pulled out every paper she could find. Pete appeared in the doorway. What are you doing? Eleanor tied the documents together with string. Going after him. By nightfall, Garrick was sitting alone behind the stone wall of the Cutter's Creek jail. He took Lydia's paper star from his shirt and unfolded it beneath the weak light from the corridor. For a long while there was nothing but bootsteps overhead. Then voices. Pete's, another man's, Sheriff Combs, and suddenly a woman's voice, calm and unmistakable. September 14th. Read the date again. Garrick lifted his head. Eleanor. She had come. Garrick remained on the narrow jail cot with Lydia's paper star open in his palm. Above him, chairs scraped across the sheriff's office floor. I'm asking again, Eleanor said. Who actually saw Garrick Hale rob that coach? Sheriff Combs answered more quietly. The warrant says information was supplied identifying him. That wasn't my question. Silence. Garrick lowered his head. For years, silence after trouble had meant the same thing. Rose was gone. The Nebraska farm was gone. Men who had once shaken his hand had looked away when the bank notice appeared. He had learned not to wait for anybody to come toward him. Yet Eleanor had ridden all the way to Cutter's Creek, and she had brought proof. Pete testified that Garrick had worked beside him from shortly after sunrise on September 14th. Caleb Yarrow had come with fence staples after noon and stayed until the work was finished. Then Eleanor laid her ranch ledger on Combs's desk. You see that entry? Garrick could hear paper turning. September 14th, Eleanor continued. 4 pounds of staples from Mercer's Mercantile. Caleb brought them. Garrick used them that afternoon. Combs said, "It's a strong alibi." "It's the truth. I still have a warrant." "Then send a wire to Laramie." Another silence. Then Coombs called for his deputy. An hour later, Garrick heard the telegraph key clicking in the office beside the jail. Near midnight, Coombs opened the cell. "I'm releasing you while we wait for confirmation. You stay in Cutter's Creek." Garrick stepped into the office. Eleanor stood beside the desk in her traveling coat. Dust marked the hem. Pete was asleep in a chair near the stove. Garrick looked at her. "You rode here tonight?" "Yes. You should have stayed with Lydia. Martha has her." "You didn't have to." Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "Don't." He stopped. "Don't thank me like I brought you a plate of supper." Garrick almost smiled. It disappeared quickly. "You ought to go back tomorrow." "I'm staying." "Eleanor. Right now you need somebody standing where people can see her." The next morning she proved exactly what she meant. The boarding house dining room smelled of bacon, coffee, and wood smoke. Conversation softened when Garrick entered. Eleanor walked beside him. There were empty tables near the rear. She chose one by the front window. Then she sat beside Garrick rather than across from him. Mabel Hicks was drinking coffee 3 tables away. Eleanor unfolded her napkin. "So, Pete says we should move the heifers before the first hard frost." Garrick glanced around the room. "You're discussing cattle?" "I own cattle." "I noticed." "Then keep up." That finally made him smile. People watched. Eleanor let them. She did not defend herself. She did not explain Garrick. She simply drank her coffee beside the man she had ridden into town to defend. By noon, Sheriff Coombs came through the boarding house door carrying a telegram. His face told Garrick something had changed. "The Laramie suspects were caught yesterday." Garrick stood. Coombs continued. "Neither one is you." Eleanor did not move. "And?" Coombs looked at her. "The original robbery notice never named Garrick Hale." The room became still. Garrick frowned. "Then how did my name get on a warrant?" "That's what bothered me." Coombs laid several papers on the table. Information identifying Garrick had been added later through a sworn statement supplied by a man connected to land transactions in the county. Eleanor read the name, then looked up. Dunore. Coombs nodded. Carl Dunore had not needed Garrick convicted. He only needed him removed. Long enough for winter trouble to weaken Cross Ranch. Long enough for Eleanor to reconsider selling the east pasture. Coombs folded the telegram. "I'm opening an inquiry into the false statement. Dunore can explain his part to the county authorities." Garrick looked at Eleanor. She had understood before he had. "He made your ranch stronger. That was why Dunore wanted him gone." By late afternoon, Garrick was riding back through the Cross Ranch gate. The kitchen door flew open. Lydia came running. "Papa!" Garrick barely had time to dismount before she reached him. He dropped to his knees. She threw both arms around his neck. "Mama said you'd come home." His eyes lifted over Lydia's shoulder. Eleanor stood on the porch. This time nobody corrected the word. That evening, Garrick found her outside after Lydia had gone to bed. "You saved me." Eleanor leaned against the porch post. "No, the truth did. You carried it into town." She looked toward the dark pasture. "You would have done the same." "Yes. I know." Garrick stepped closer. Eleanor did not retreat. "Stop thanking me like you're leaving," she said. His breath caught. For a moment there was only the soft creak of the porch boards. Then Traveler whinnied from the barn. Eleanor glanced toward the sound. Whatever might have happened between them waited. The next morning Pete examined Traveler one last time. He ran his hand down the right foreleg, pressed the old injury. then walked the gelding across the yard. Traveler moved cleanly. Pete gave Garrick's shoulder a firm slap. Horse can carry you wherever you want to go now. Garrick looked toward the house. Eleanor was standing beside the kitchen door with a coffee cup in her hands. She had heard. Their eyes met. Eleanor turned away first. Before dawn the following morning, she woke to a familiar sound. Leather pulling through a buckle. Eleanor dressed quickly and stepped outside. The eastern sky was only beginning to pale. Traveler stood in the barn aisle, saddled. Garrick's bedroll was tied behind the cantle, and Garrick Hale was tightening the final strap. Eleanor stood in the barn doorway. He's healed. Garrick's hands stopped. Yeah. So you're leaving. Traveler shifted his weight. Leather creaked softly against the saddle tree. Garrick looked at Eleanor. I've got enough to reach the next cattle country. Lydia's healthy. Dunore's finished. You won't have trouble because of me anymore. Did I say you were trouble? No. Did I ask you to leave? No. He lowered his eyes. You gave us everything when we had nothing. I paid you wages. You gave Lydia more than wages. Eleanor's face changed. Garrick continued before courage failed him. You deserve some peace. Did I say you disturbed my peace? No. Then stop deciding things for me. He looked up. Eleanor stepped farther into the barn. Don't leave because you've decided it's better for me. The words struck him because he had heard them before. After Mabel Hicks came. Don't decide what I can endure on my behalf. Eleanor stopped beside Traveler. Ask me. Ask you what? What's better for me? Outside, a rooster called from behind the house. Garrick swallowed. What's better for you, Eleanor? She looked straight at him. You staying. Nothing moved except Traveler's tail. Garrick stared at her. You don't need me. I know. My money wouldn't buy half this barn. I know that too. I came through your gate with 3 coins, a sick girl and a horse that could barely walk. Eleanor's voice softened. You think because you came here broke, you came here empty? He said nothing. I could run Cross Ranch before you arrived. I'll own it whether you stay or go. You didn't save my ranch, Garrick. He looked away. Eleanor took another step. But you repaired things without acting like that made them yours. You helped me without trying to make my decisions. And Lydia... Her voice caught. She glanced toward the house. After Francis died, there were rooms I stopped entering unless I had to. After Thomas died, I could work from before daylight until supper and still stand outside some evenings because I didn't want to walk into that quiet house. Garrick looked back at her. Then you brought Lydia through my door. Eleanor's eyes shone, but she did not look away. I didn't need you to save Cross Ranch. A long pause. I needed a reason to want to come inside when the work was done. Garrick turned toward Traveler. Slowly he untied the bedroll. It dropped onto the barn floor. Then he loosened the cinch. Eleanor did not help him. The choice had to belong to him. Garrick lifted the saddle from Traveler's back and set it over the rail. Eleanor looked in at the horse. Poor animal. Garrick turned. What's wrong with him? Spent all those weeks healing for nothing. Garrick looked at Traveler, then at her. Not nothing. He crossed the space between them. His hand rose to her cheek, but stopped just short. May I? Eleanor nodded. Garrick kissed her. There was no urgency in it, no debt, no bargain. Traveler was sound. Lydia was well. Garrick could ride away that morning, and he did not. Winter came hard to Wyoming. Snow covered the east pasture and piled against the north fence Garrick had repaired. He remained Eleanor's paid ranch hand. Cross Ranch remained hers. They argued sometimes, over cattle feed, over whether Garrick should ride during a storm, once over a broken gate latch. But Garrick learned something harder than leaving. He learned to stay after disagreement. One snowy night, Eleanor found him sitting beside the parlor window, watching flakes sweep across the yard. Thinking about leaving? Garrick looked outside. No. A moment passed. Thinking how strange it is that I'm not. Eleanor sat beside him. By March, every excuse was gone. Traveler was strong, Lydia was healthy. Dunore's threat had ended. Cross Ranch had survived winter. Garrick had saved enough wages to travel wherever he pleased. One evening, the first warm wind came across the pasture. Lydia was asleep inside. Eleanor and Garrick sat together on the porch. "I've got enough money now," he said. Eleanor's hands became still. "To go anywhere." She looked toward the darkness. Garrick took her hand. "I don't want anywhere." She turned back. "I want to marry you, Eleanor." Her eyes searched his face. "Not because Lydia needs a mother. Not because you need a ranch hand. Not because I need land." His thumb moved across her knuckles. "I want to marry you because when I think about tomorrow now, you're in it." Eleanor looked toward Traveler grazing beyond the fence. "I've known I loved you since November." Garrick blinked. "November?" "Yes. It's March." A small smile appeared. "I'm careful." 4 months careful? I didn't say I was fast." Garrick laughed, then waited. Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Yes." They married in April of 1889 in the Little Cutters Creek Church. Pete and Martha Yarrow came. Caleb came. Sheriff Combs stood near the back. Some townspeople attended. Others stayed away. Eleanor needed neither their permission nor their approval. When Lydia entered, Garrick forgot everybody else in the room. She wore a new dress. Around the waist was a green sash, the same one she had stared at in the catalog all those months before. Garrick looked at Eleanor. She remembered. After the ceremony, Lydia took Eleanor's hand, then Garrick's. "Come on, Mama." She tugged his fingers. "Papa." This time nobody hesitated. A year after Garrick first knocked on Eleanor's door, late summer grass stood green along the drainage ditch. Traveler grazed beyond the fence. Completely healthy, no saddle, no bedroll. Lydia sat on the porch writing slowly in a little journal. Eleanor settled beside Garrick. He watched Traveler lift his head toward the evening wind. "I only knocked on your door because that horse couldn't go another mile." Eleanor leaned against him. "Then maybe I was right." "About what?" She nodded toward Traveler. "Maybe I didn't want him getting better." Garrick smiled. "He got better." Eleanor looked at him. Garrick took her hand. "I stayed anyway." And maybe that was the real ending all along. Not that Traveler healed. Not that Cross Ranch survived another Wyoming winter. Not even that two people who had already buried so much found the courage to love again. It was that Garrick finally had the freedom to leave, and chose to stay. Imagine standing where he stood that morning, with a sound horse beneath your saddle and an open road ahead. Would you recognize the home you had found? Or would old fear convince you to keep moving before love had the chance to ask you to remain? Sometimes healing doesn't return us to the life we had before. Sometimes it carries us somewhere new. Garrick had lost Rose, his farm, and nearly his faith in tomorrow. Eleanor had lost Thomas and Francis and learned how quiet a house could become. Neither could undo those losses, but together, with Lydia between them and Traveler grazing beyond the fence, they discovered that loving again was not betraying the people they had lost. It was choosing to live with the heart that remained. If you were in Garrick's place, would you have ridden through that gate? Or unsaddled your horse? Tell me in the comments. I'd truly like to know. And if stories about second chances, quiet courage, and love found in unexpected places mean something to you, you're welcome to subscribe. There are more journeys waiting down the trail, some mysterious, some heartbreaking, and some that might leave a little healing behind.